In 1956, something unusual rolled off the assembly lines at Ford Motor Company. It was not a sedan, not quite a typical station wagon, and definitely not a sports car either. It was called the Ford Parklane. It only existed for one model year, and then disappeared like someone who left the party early. But even though it was only around briefly, the 1956 Ford Parklane made enough noise to deserve a full story. This is the tale of a two-door wagon that was made to challenge its rival from Chevrolet, but ended up becoming something else entirely. The Ford Parklane was built to compete directly with the Chevrolet Bel Air Nomad. The Nomad had made waves in 1955 with its sporty looks and unique design. Ford wanted a piece of that market without spending a fortune on new parts or redesigning their cars from scratch. So they took their existing ranch wagon and dressed it up using parts and styling cues from the more expensive Fairlane model. The result was a car that looked fancier than most wagons, but still had the same bones underneath. It had a stainless steel spear down the side, ribbed metal on the pillars, and even full carpeting in the cargo area. Not exactly your average grocery getter. Ford made only 15,186 Parklanes in 1956. That is more than the Chevrolet Nomad, which had 8,103 units that year, but Ford still decided to stop making it after just 1 year. The Parklane helped Ford sell more wagons overall than Chevrolet in 1956, with Ford producing 214,446 wagons to Chevrolet's 193,194. But when Ford redesigned all their models for 1957, they replaced the Parklane with a new car called the Del Rio. In Mercury showrooms, the Parklane name came back, but this time for a full-size luxury car, not a wagon. The 1956 Parklane came with a choice of engines. The base was a 223 cubic inch six-cylinder that made 137 horsepower. Buyers could also pick the 292 cubic inch V8 called the Thunderbird V8 with up to 202 horsepower. The top option was the 312 cubic inch Thunderbird Special V8, which could go up to 225 horsepower. If you were feeling like a rebel, there was even a racing kit with 2 carburetors that could boost the power up to around 260 horsepower. Not bad for a family car. The car had a wheelbase of 115.5 inches and weighed about 3,503 pounds when equipped with the V8 engine. It was 197.6 inches long and 75.9 inches wide. The ride was controlled by coil springs up front and leaf springs in the back. It had 11-inch drum brakes and a frame with 5 cross members. Fuel tank size was 19 gallons. Good enough for road trips or long drives to nowhere in particular. Inside the Parklane came with fancy features for the time. It had color-matched cloth and vinyl seats, carpeting all the way into the cargo area, and options like power windows, a 4-way power seat, select air conditioning, and an AM radio. It even had a tissue dispenser. Safety was also part of the plan. Ford called it lifeguard design. That included a deep-dish steering wheel, stronger door latches, padded dashboard, and seat belts, though most people just used those to hold their groceries in place. Ford made the Parklane to compete with Chevrolet, and while it may have technically won the numbers game, the model was never meant to stay. It came, it sold reasonably well, and then it vanished. Today, surviving Parklanes are rare. Most people who see one now just ask, "What is that?" Then, maybe they smile. Or maybe they walk away confused, which is fair. It was that kind of car. Back in the mid-1970s, something odd rolled off the assembly lines at Mercury. It was a small wagon with fake wood on the sides. A car trying to look fancier than it actually was. It was not flashy. It did not roar like a muscle car. It was called the Mercury Bobcat Villager. Most people today do not even know it existed. But it had a strange charm, and it played a quiet role in how American car brands reacted to the changing world of fuel prices, compact designs, and customer tastes. This is the story of a car that looked like a house cat pretending to be a lion. The Mercury Bobcat was born in Canada in 1974. Mercury, a division of Ford Motor Company, wanted to offer a small car in their lineup without starting from scratch. So they took the Ford Pinto and gave it a Mercury-style makeover. The Bobcat came to the United States in 1975. It looked like the Pinto's cousin, who read fashion magazines. With a different grille, fancier trim, and some chrome sprinkled around, it aimed to be the classy compact. The Villager model of the Bobcat was the station wagon version. It came with wood-grained side panels and was named after Mercury's long history of giving their wagons the Villager name. They had used that name on cars like the Mercury Comet Villager and the Mercury Montego Villager. They figured the name still had some magic left. In reality, it had some plastic wood and a roof rack. The car had two body styles. The runabout was the three-door hatchback, and the Villager was the three-door wagon. Inside you got vinyl seats, a steering wheel, and not much else. It was a car, not a spaceship. Under the hood, the Mercury Bobcat Villager started with a 2.3-liter inline-4 engine. It made 83 horsepower and around 148 pound-feet of torque. If you wanted a little more grunt, you could upgrade to the 2.8-liter V6. That one made 97 horsepower and 139 pound-feet of torque. The car came with either a 3-speed manual, 3-speed automatic, or a 4-speed manual that was added in 1976. All of them powered the rear wheels. The car was not light. Despite being a small wagon, it weighed about 2,600 to 2,800 pounds. That was 700 pounds more than some versions of the Pinto. Mercury said this made the car feel solid. Others said it just made the engine work harder. The Mercury Bobcat Villager stayed in production until 1980. After that, Mercury replaced it with the Mercury Lynx, which was based on the Ford Escort. The Bobcat never had a big following, but it did sell about 224,026 units. That is a lot of fake wood on wheels. It might not be a legend like the Mustang or a mystery like the DeLorean, but the Bobcat Villager had a role. It was Mercury's way of telling people, here is a small car that does not look completely cheap. In the end, it was a compact with a costume, a Pinto in a Mercury suit, and maybe that is why it is still worth talking about. In 1954, a strange-looking station wagon rolled out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. It had a dipped roofline, skirted front wheels, and a name that sounded like it belonged on a covered wagon crossing the plains. Cross Country. It was made by Nash, a car company that most people today have never heard of. But back then, Nash was fighting to stay alive. Their weapon, the 1954 Nash Rambler Cross Country, a compact four-door wagon that did things a little differently. This car came from an independent car maker. It looked odd, and it drove a little slow, but it was part of a bigger story about what happens when little companies try to take on the big guys. The Nash Rambler Cross Country came out in 1954, just as Nash Motors was getting ready to merge with Hudson. Together, they would form American Motors Corporation later that year. That makes this model one of the last Nash-only compacts ever sold. It was built in two places, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and El Segundo, California. Between both factories, they made about 9,039 units of the cross-country wagon that year. That may sound like a lot, but in the 1950s car world, that is not a huge number. Ford and Chevrolet were selling cars by the hundreds of thousands. This Rambler had a 108-inch wheelbase, a stretched version of the earlier 100-inch design. That gave it 4 doors and a bit more room for families. It was powered by either a 184 cubic inch flathead 6-cylinder engine with 85 horsepower or a 195.8 cubic inch version that made 90 horsepower when paired with a 4-speed Hydramatic transmission borrowed from General Motors. The manual cars came with a 4.38-to-1 rear axle, and the automatic cars had a taller 3.54-to-1 ratio. The engines were not fast. 0 to 60 miles per hour took about 19 seconds. But they were good on gas for the time, with some tests showing up to 30 miles per gallon with overdrive. The front suspension used coil springs mounted high up, which was a Nash trick for better ride comfort. In the rear, it had simple leaf springs. All 4 wheels had 11-inch drum brakes. The cross-country also had some smart features. The front seats folded flat to make a bed, which made camping easier for families. The roof had a dip over the rear doors, not just for style, but because Nash used the same door stampings for wagons and sedans. That saved money. They covered that dip with a roof rack, so it looked more normal from the side. There was even a weather eye heater and a full air conditioning unit offered, which was rare in small cars back then. The car also had a hood ornament designed by George Petty, who was known for painting pin-up girls. So, yes, your station wagon could come with a tiny chrome lady on the hood. In total, the cross-country was a mix of ideas, some clever, some weird. Today, not many are left, because rust and time took their toll. But this little wagon helped Nash stay in the game a little longer, and it laid the foundation for what would become American Motors. It was not perfect, but it was practical, and it tried something different. For that, it earns a small but real place in automotive history. In 1961, something unusual rolled off the assembly lines at Pontiac. It was not a muscle car, and it was not a luxury cruiser. It was a station wagon with a name that sounded more like a storm than a car. Tempest Safari. On the outside, it looked like a regular family car. But under the skin, it was one of the most oddly built and clever machines General Motors had ever tried to sell. People were not sure what to make of it. That is where our story begins, at the odd corner of innovation, practicality, and a little bit of noise. The 1961 Pontiac Tempest Safari was part of a new wave of compact cars. It came from the engineers at General Motors under Project X100. The company wanted a car that could compete with Chevrolet's Corvair, but with a more traditional front-engine design. Pontiac, under John DeLorean's direction, took that idea and built something that looked normal, but drove completely differently. And no, not everyone was ready for it. The Tempest was built on the General Motors Y platform. That meant it shared its basic structure with the Buick Special, Buick Skylark, and Oldsmobile F85 and Cutlass. But it was far from a copy. The Tempest had a unit body, or monocoque design, which gave it strength without needing a separate frame. It had a 112-inch wheelbase and almost perfect weight balance between the front and rear. The engine in the front was called the Trophy 4. It was a 194.5 cubic inch slant 4 engine. Pontiac made it by literally slicing a 389 cubic inch V8 engine in half. The result was not very smooth, but it worked. You could get 3 versions, a 110 horsepower single barrel, a 120 horsepower version with higher compression, and a 166 horsepower version with a 4-barrel carburetor. It was noisy and shaky, but it did the job. The weirdest part of the Tempest, and especially the Safari wagon, was how the engine connected to the wheels. Instead of a normal drive shaft, it had a curved, flexible steel cable called a rope drive. This rope connected the front engine to a rear-mounted transaxle. That is right. The transmission and differential were in the back. That gave the car good balance and allowed for a flat floor inside, but also meant it was not easy to fix. Mechanics had a lot to say about that rope drive, and not all of it was polite. The Safari version was the station wagon. It came with the same Trophy 4 engine, and very few buyers ever chose the optional 215 cubic inch aluminum V8 from Buick. That engine made about 155 horsepower, but showed up in less than 1% of Tempests. The wagon had a swing axle in the back, 15-inch wheels, and big 9-inch brake drums with a 5 on 4.5-inch bolt pattern. The Safari also came with electric wipers, dual sun visors, turn signals, and even child-proof door locks. The Tempest won Motor Trend's 1961 Car of the Year, thanks to all that strange engineering. But not everyone was convinced. John DeLorean once joked that the car rattled like half a trunk full of rolling rocks. That was not just a joke. These cars could be loud and quirky. They were also overbuilt and expensive to make. By 1964, Pontiac gave up the rope drive and weird layout. They redesigned the Tempest to be a normal mid-size car. Still, the 1961 Tempest Safari left its mark. Today, collectors hunt for them, especially the wagons. Some replace the Trophy 4 with a small block V8 or even a 455 cubic inch monster with Indy heads. Others try to restore the strange original. Whether you call it clever, flawed, or just different, the Tempest Safari was one of the most unusual cars Pontiac ever built, and maybe the only one that needed both a wrench and a sense of humor to own.